Hello everyone and welcome to Yarnaphilia. And for the love of yarn, today we are going to work on the tubular cast on in a 1x1 rib, which is a knitting technique also known as the invisible cast on method. I'm showing you a project I'm working on where you can see I've already done this method in a 1x1 rib, and you can see how those stitches just seem to fall off the edge, looking like there's really no cast on at all. The nice thing about the method I'm teaching you today is there's no spare yarn, extra needles, or crochet hooks needed. We're just gonna start with your yarn and your needles. However, you will need a pair of needles that is a size, at least one size or more, smaller than the needles needed for the pattern. So right here, I'm pulling out, I've got 3 pairs because the larger pairs are going to be used for the main body of this pattern, not the ribbing portion. And the smaller needles are what I'm going to use, the smallest needles I'm going to use to cast on the project. With those middle needles, I'm going to use for the main body of the ribbing itself. So just make sure that you've got needles that are one size. Technically, these needles are 2 sizes smaller, which is okay. And so the method we're using to cast on the stitches is also known as the long tail method or provisional cast on. In order to do this, you're going to need a very long tail yarn. And so what I'm doing here is I am wrapping my working yarn around the needle for the number of stitches to ensure a long tail. Now, because in this project, I'm actually going to be using 100 stitches, in order to save myself from some time, instead of counting out 100 stitches, I'm just going to count 20 stitches, or 20 wraps, I should say. So I'm doing 20 wraps around my needle, as you can see, and then I'll use that length to measure out 4 more lengths of yarn, which will give me 5 total lengths of 20, which is equal to roughly 100 wraps. And when I do this, you'll see in the end, I have a very long tail left over, which is a good thing. So what's really important here as we get ready to cast on our stitches is that we will cast on 1 purl and knit stitch together in pairs, but you're going to want to make sure you're holding your yarn the right way. So you see how I'm putting the tail yarn over my thumb, and the working yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn off screen is in my forefinger. Now I'm wrapping it. I'm going to wrap the needle in my right hand. I'm going to wrap it around the yarn. It's going to kind of go, you see I did a little twist there. I'll do it a couple times for you. It's going to go kind of under the working side and around. Just like that. And that's the first stitch. Just like that. No slip knot. We're going to do just 1 simple little twist, and then we're going to start casting on the rest of the stitches. That stitch is our purl stitch. So now we're going to cast on the knit stitch. For the knit stitch, we're going to go under the tail yarn. Watch me do it. Under the tail, over the working, and around. To cast on a purl stitch, we're going to go under the working yarn. One more time. Under the working yarn, over the tail. See how I'm moving my hand along with it? And around. And as you do this, you'll see that the yarn actually creates little pairs, little couples. So there's 3 stitches on the needle with that purl and knit stitch are kind of coupled together. And we got a purl stitch hanging out, so we're going to do a knit stitch. That's under the tail and over the working and around. And start over. Under the tail, over the working and around. Under the working, over the tail and around. Under the tail, over the working and around. And so with this method, if you're doing a 1x1 ribbing, you're going to cast on stitches in a multiple of 2. But if you're going to do a 2x2 ribbing, you're going to cast on stitches in a multiple of 4. And we're going to show you a little later a minor adjustment to this style to go from 1-to-1 ribbing to 2x2 ribbing using just one technique. So I'm going to give you guys one more go around, a couple more stitches for you guys to see here before we move on to the next step. So purl stitches go around that way and knit stitches come under this way. You're going to purl and knit. Purl and one knit. You can see how you get a hang of it and you kind of work the yarn around your own way. So there we go, guys. Y'all can see how the stitches are making their own little pairs together. I'm trying to pull things tight to keep it even. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this up and come right back around so you can do row 2 of this method. All right, we are back. Now, we've got all of our stitches there. Don't worry, we're not joining just yet. So don't worry that they're not going to reach the other side. But we want to make sure you turn your work very carefully because that last stitch is just kind of hanging out there. So you see how I'm going to be very careful about how I turn these stitches around. And making sure I hold both yarns extremely tight. Sorry for going off camera, guys. And then I'm going to get that tail yarn and I'm going to really wrap it around my finger there. So working yarn is in my right hand, tail yarn is here in my left hand. And just to make sure it's extra tight, only for these first 2 stitches until it'll be secure. But until then, I'm going to hold it extra tight, give it a little extra wrap around my finger. And of course, using that next needle, what you're going to do is you're going to slip the first purl stitch and every purl stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. And then you're going to knit the knit stitches. However, as you should be able to see here, the knit stitches, you're going to knit them through the back loop. This is very important. You don't want to create, dare I say, twisted stitches. So I'm going to show you guys what I'm doing here, so you can see what's going on. So of course for this first stitch, but the nature of where the yarn already is in front. So you're just going to slip it purlwise. Let's get that focus. There we go. You're going to slip that stitch purlwise, and I'm showing you the knit, the purls, and how those little pairs are linking up here. So you're going to slip that first stitch purlwise. And you see how that knit stitch would look a little twisted if you knit through the front loop. And that's what we're going to knit through the back loop here. So it's a little challenging just to get started on this second row here. And once you've knit that stitch, you can actually let go of that tail yarn now, because that first stitch is secure, and move yarn in the front to slip that purl stitch, and then knit the knit stitch through the back loop. And that's it. We're just going to carry on like that all the way across. So here we go, slipping that purl stitch with the yarn in front, moving the yarn to the back, knitting that knit stitch through the back loop. Yarn forward, slip the purl, yarn back, knit the knit to the back. Yarn forward, slip the purl, yarn and back, knit the knit through the back. Yarn front, slip the purl, yarn back, knit the back through the back. Yarn front, slip the purl, yarn back, knit the knit through the back. You do want to hold things pretty tight here because they have a way of loosening up later on. So I'm here at the end and just wanted to show you that that last knit stitch, the very last stitch here, you're going to see I'm going to slip this purl stitch really quick. The very last knit stitch is that stitch that we just twisted. So for that one, we're going to knit it in the front loop so that the end looks neat. And it is a little twisted, but every other knit stitch was knit through the back loop. So now we're going to get ready to join. And in this next row, we're going to slip the knit stitches with the yarn in the back and purl the purl stitches. But first, before we can join, we have got to check for twisting. So the way we do that is by pulling our stitches, pulling this whole row really lean and taut, and moving the work that is done towards the center of the project, the center of the needles, that inside curve, if you will, of your circular needle. So you just give yourself a moment to just make sure you stretch everything out. And of course, since we're joining as well. Another little tip here, guys, is make sure when you join that you do knit those first couple of stitches as tight as you can. Everything does work out in the end, no matter what. But as possible, just see if you can knit that first stitch or two as tightly as you can. Or should I say purl? Right, so we got our stitches here. Trying to show them to you, the knits versus the purl stitches. Just got to get in focus. There we are. So we're starting with There we go. So we're getting our purl stitch going. Doing it nice and tight. And you see we got that, of course, slipping the knit stitches with the yarn in the back and purling the purl stitches. Now that we've checked everything and we're getting ready to go. So slip the knit stitches. And purl the purl stitches. Now this row can be a bit of a challenge. You really want to make sure that you move your stitches on your left needle. Try to bring them as close to up front in order to prevent stretching, though you may end up stretching a little bit on the back end. And that's how it definitely looks and was here, as I'm working on a 24-inch needle with these 100 stitches. And that's just because the 16-inch needle definitely would have been too short. We were kind of in an in-between space. So if we're still learning how to knit, if we're beginning knitters or intermediate knitters, that is always something to consider, the length of your needle and how that'll impact the work that you're doing. And don't mind me having a little bit of trouble with this yarn. The yarn I'm using today on this project is the Lion brand Ice Cream Family Roving Divigation, if I'm correct. And it's a roving style yarn. Also an acrylic roving style yarn. It was a little bit of a challenge to work with. But anywho, as we finish this first row, now we've joined our project, it is time to switch to the larger needle. Which is the good news, because now that we switched over to our larger needle, we can just focus on the basic ribbing pattern. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to switch over to our larger needle. This knitting needle set is the Addy Squared. The longer version, or the regular length version, Addy Squared interchangeable needle set, which I'll definitely be discussing in a future video about how to pick your needles and which one to use. I'm just showing you here that I use a 3.5 millimeter, and I'm moving up now to a 4 millimeter, which is a US 4 up to a US 6. Now this pattern actually called for me to use the US size 4 needles for the entire ribbing pattern with this worsted weight yarn. However, I did not have smaller needles in the appropriate length, and using, of course, worsted weight yarn, 3.5 millimeters is about as small as you can really knit with worsted weight yarn. So this is actually a small modification made to this pattern by then doing the ribbing in a slightly larger needle, because this kit did not come with the 3.75 millimeter needle, which would be a US 5. And once again, I did not personally have that size needle in the right length. But anywho, now that you've gotten everything all worked out, you've moved to your larger needle, you're usually going to always start with a purl stitch, then a knit stitch. What I'm going to do here is do a few rows and get back to you all so you can see what it looks like in the end. But before we do that, I'm going to give you guys a little trick. This method can be used to do 2x2 ribbing, and the way you do that is in this portion, after you've joined, you're going to do what I'm doing right here, which is you're going to knit your first purl stitch, then your first knit stitch, and then when you get to the next purl stitch, you're actually going to grab that stitch and the one behind it, the knit stitch behind it. You're going to pick them up and carry them kind of across and switch places so that you have 2 knit stitches and now 2 purl stitches. So you see what I did there? Don't worry, if you missed it, I'll do it again. So I knit a purl stitch and then a knit stitch. Now I'm going to take the 2 stitches, it's a knit and a purl stitch. I'm going to get underneath them, see, right there, move them onto the other needle. Then I'm going to, one at a time, move those stitches back onto my left needle, purl stitch in the back, knit stitch in the front, and then I can just knit the knit stitch, purl that purl stitch that got moved, then purl the purl stitch next to it, and so on and so on. So that's the way that you can use this method here to create a 2x2 ribbing pattern without really making any other adjustments. No crochet hooks, no spare yarn, 2 styles in one system to create a truly seamless, clean edge. Like I said, I'm going to undo this a little bit right there because this project that I'm working on calls for 1x1 ribbing. But I just wanted to show you guys that. Feel free to leave a comment in the section, note in the comment section down below if you have any trouble understanding that. I understand this yarn is a bit bright in these bright lights, and I don't mind doing this again if you guys need. But here's the finished result. I've done a few stitches, a few rows here, and you can see the smooth, seamless edge, and you can see how that using the smaller needle in the foundation row causes the entire project to look pretty even and neat. I challenge you to go look back in the very beginning of this video at the first set I did where I used the exact same size needle all throughout, and you can actually see how at the bottom the stitches seem to spread out and run into each other. But here they don't, and you get a nice stretchy, neat, smooth, soft, and kind of rounded seamless edge. That's why it's called a tubular cast on, because it creates a bit of a tube. And it's just ideal to use for things like cuffs, bottom of sweaters, brims of hats, any place where you want something stretchy and a little gentle. So I hope you guys appreciated this video. I hope I answered some questions for you guys and didn't take up too much of your time. Just reminding you to use that smaller needle, and why I really feel like it's a good idea to have an interchangeable needle set like what I'm using here, so that you have other needles always available instead of having to buy as you go. But anyways, how would you use this method? Let me know in the comment section down below. What did you think? And of course, if you want more content such as this, I'm going to be doing some crochet techniques and of course plenty of yarn reviews. But if you wanted any more content like this, how to knit, how to crochet, how to do the things with the yarn, how to buy it, how to store it, let me know in the comment section down below and I will make a video for you. Otherwise, if you generally like this content or looking forward to learning more about yarn and things to do with it, subscribe to this channel as I will have plenty more content on the way for you. Otherwise, I want to give you guys a great thank you for sticking around to the end here. I hope to have more content for you very soon. All right? Enjoy and happy yarning. Bye-bye.